The day I realized my boss would rather wreck a production line than admit he was wrong, I watched a simple corporate request turn into a 5-hour shutdown, bent sensors, metal and plastic embedded in product, and a freight-sized box of unusable junk shipped straight to the engineer who demanded it. This happened about 10 years ago, when I was a process engineer at a large manufacturing plant. My job was a bit of everything: auditing equipment health, chasing down scrap and defects, sitting in meetings as the designated smart person who had to translate big ideas into what our machines could actually survive. But the best part of my job, by far, was running trials. Trials were basically industrial science experiments. Tweak one chemical component, track how it behaved through every step of the process, test it at each stage, and if it worked, start the long approval process to make that change permanent in the product we sold. I ran hundreds of trials a year, and I was good at it. I wasn't a manager, but during trials, I effectively had authority over the process and the people involved, because there's no point doing a trial if half the plant is allowed to freestyle it. One day, I got pulled into a conference call with a handful of engineers from a downstream department I barely knew, plus a new engineer from corporate I had never met. That was already odd. My relationships with corporate were usually solid. We'd argue, sure, but it was constructive. They brought deeper chemistry expertise. I brought the reality of what happens when you scale something to plant level. This call was not that. There was no debate, no back and forth. I got told, flat out, that our material wasn't sticky enough for their next stage needs, and we had to increase tack. They rattled off 4 ways to do it, and informed me my only choice was which option to start with. I remember just sitting there thinking, are you kidding me? Because from my side, the material was already too sticky. It was difficult to run on my equipment. This stuff grabbed everything. When it stuck, we made scrap or borderline product. Sometimes that borderline product still went downstream, which created even more waste and defects later. In fact, I'd been working with our corporate chemists on the opposite goal, making it less sticky, not more. I explained all of this. I also explained something they apparently didn't want to hear. The material naturally lost tack over time. The first day or two after production, it was pretty sticky. After that, it usually mellowed into a sweet spot. We guaranteed tack performance for at least 7 days, and audits backed that up. If they were using material older than a week and complaining it wasn't sticky, that wasn't a chemistry problem. That was a logistics and handling problem. And I suspected I knew exactly what was happening. They were probably rotating material the lazy way, pulling old product when switching over, then shoving it back in later with newer product to avoid extra work. If you play games like that, of course your average age starts creeping up. I said it as calmly as I could. Changing the formulation wouldn't fix bad habits and poor inventory discipline. Didn't matter. I was one voice against a wall of people who kept repeating variations of, "We're the customer. Our customer needs this, and you're going to make it happen." I had never been spoken to like that inside that company, and I hated it. A few days later, a corporate trial suddenly appeared on my schedule. I'm using the term trial generously, because what showed up looked like a rough draft someone had vomited into a form and hit send. It was missing basic, critical information. The plan required samples, but didn't specify how many, what size, and who they needed to go to. Details that matter when your company is huge, and dozens of trials are happening across multiple plants at any given time. There were no shipping instructions. Corporate usually prepaid shipping and sent me the documentation because I didn't handle internal finance. This plan had none of it. And that wasn't the only problem. There were at least 5 or 6 more holes that made it obvious the trial hadn't even truly left the planning stage. I brought it to my boss. I told him in short that this trial didn't make sense for our department, ran counter to the direction we'd been taking the chemistry, and wasn't properly defined. He nodded like he understood. That was enough for me. So I did something I almost never had to do. I rejected the trial on behalf of the plant. I'd only rejected trials a handful of times before, and every time it was done in cooperation with corporate. This draft is missing key details. Let's redesign it. This was the first time I rejected something that I had openly opposed, with corporate trying to muscle it through anyway. A couple weeks went by, and I forgot about it, until the exact same trial showed up on my schedule again. I was furious. I went to my boss. Only now the corporate engineer had gone around me and complained directly to him. My boss told me I was running the trial, period. I repeated everything I'd said before. He didn't care. He insisted I contact corporate, close the gaps, but I was running it no matter what. And to understand why this was about to go badly, you need to know my boss. In 3 years at that company, I'd had 7 managers. Some were competent but got moved around by reorganizations. 1 died. A couple were placeholders until someone permanent arrived. This one? The worst by a mile. He'd done well at corporate, so they shipped him to our plant to manage the engineering department. None of us liked him. He didn't understand our area at all. To him, my job was background noise. He cared about one thing: output he could count and ship, anything happening earlier in the process, anything about upstream stability, equipment protection, building robust processing windows. Might as well have been invisible, even though on paper, he was responsible for it, and responsible for me. So this time, I didn't reject the trial again. I also didn't approve it. I just left it sitting in pending my approval, and I emailed the corporate engineer a clean, professional list of the information I required before I could start. No insults, no sarcasm. Just, here's what I need. Of course, nobody answered. A couple days later, my boss storms in. He says corporate is accusing our department of obstructing work, being negative, being difficult, and he orders me to approve and launch the trial immediately. I remind him of the risks: increased scrap, slowed lines, potential equipment damage, plus the fact the trial still isn't properly specified. He doesn't care. He tells me I'm an engineer and I'm paid to do this. He tells me I need to get corporate their material, and he makes it clear, very clear, that my job is on the line if I keep resisting. Fine. I approved the trial, and that's where the malicious compliance began. First step, preparing the material. I asked a colleague to make the batch. He came back looking like he'd been through a war. The material was such a nightmare that he had to do parts of it by hand, and he ruined 2 batches before the 3rd one finally met. The spec corporate demanded. In my world, that alone should have killed the trial. Because industrial processing isn't about whether you can pull off a one-time stunt. It's about whether you can build a repeatable process that works day after day for years. We failed twice before we got 1 batch, means the formulation isn't viable. But not today. Today, we were getting corporate their material. Next step, scheduling. Normally, I planned trials around production needs, run them when downstream had coverage, and we could afford disruption. This time I did the opposite. I found the product we were shortest on, and I pulled it from the schedule to make room for this trial. Was it petty? Absolutely. But my boss had just threatened my job, and I wasn't going to sacrifice my position to protect his metrics. If he wanted the trial so badly, he could feel the consequences. We started the run. The material immediately stuck to everything. It was a mess exactly like I'd predicted. We stopped the machine over and over to scrape it off surfaces. That should have been the end. We kept going. We had sensors that rode along the moving material, light contact, gentle measurement. But the tack was so aggressive, the material grabbed the sensors and twisted them. I watched the levers bend. I knew some of that damage wouldn't be reversible without machining. Completely unacceptable. We kept going. Then one sensor snagged so hard it broke open. Now pieces of metal, plastic, and electronics were embedded in the product. At this point, we weren't just making bad material. We were making contaminated trash. We still kept going because corporate needs material. Downstream, we had a section designed to keep flow uniform. The tack was so high the material wouldn't flow smoothly. It clumped. That meant what came out was wildly uneven. Thick and heavy on one side, thin on the other. No consistency, no stability. Pure scrap. I told them to continue. By now, the operators were openly angry. They started calling their supervisors. Maintenance showed up. Other engineers showed up. Everyone wanted to know what the hell I was doing. I gave them the same sentence every time. This trial is approved by my manager. I'm required to run it. If you have complaints, take them to him. I said nothing else. I sent every single person straight to his office. Eventually, the unevenness combined with the tack created a new problem. The leveling rollers in post-processing started getting pulled off center. People started talking about a full-line realignment, a 3 to 4 day reset. And that was the line I wasn't going to cross. The lesson was already being taught. I finally allowed the run to stop. Nothing made it through to final product. Normally, a run like that would produce around 900 kilograms. This produced essentially zero usable material. Even if something had finished, it would have been unusable anyway. Operators spent the rest of the day cleaning, repairing, and swapping out damaged sensors. We lost roughly 5 hours of machine time, plus repair labor, plus the opportunity cost of the product I'd yanked off the schedule. But I wasn't done. I cut samples of the disaster, chunks from the thick side, chunks from the thin side. I found a piece with part of the broken sensor embedded inside, and took that too. Because honestly, it was hilarious in a dark way. There was so much material it was too heavy to carry normally. But that's what industrial transport is for. For a brief moment, I considered sending some of it to our plant lab, because that's standard procedure during trials. But I stopped myself. Lab equipment is sensitive. If that sticky garbage grabbed something inside an instrument, it could break it and shut down more than just a line. It could cause bigger delays for the entire site. I didn't want collateral damage. The point wasn't to burn the building down, the point was to make the consequences impossible to ignore. So instead, I hauled the heaviest samples to shipping. Corporate still hadn't provided shipping paperwork, but I found the address of the corporate engineer's office in the directory. He was going to get his material, an enormous, heavy package of unusable junk he wouldn't be able to lift. We didn't have normal forms, but we did have a private courier vendor we used for urgent shipments when regular mail was too slow. It was expensive, but it was the only tool available, so I used it. Then I avoided my office for a few hours because I knew what was happening. When I finally walked in, my boss was exactly where I expected, buried under calls and angry visits about the chaos on the floor. I laid out the facts, the mess, the stoppages, the sensor damage, the contamination, the near miss on a multi-day realignment. I apologized, carefully, professionally, for ending the trial early instead of gambling with a full roller reset. I showed him the sample I'd kept. He was still furious. Then I handed him the one thing I knew would make him smile. In the sloppy trial request, there was a key detail corporate had included, an account number for billing. I told my boss the plant needed to charge everything to that account. Not just the ruined material and damaged sensors, but the downtime, the labor, the lost production from the schedule disruption. Everything tied to this trial. I estimated the total hit at around $20,000 to $30,000, maybe more, depending on how our accounting calculated downtime. My job survived, so I assumed that billing account number helped the plant survive the situation internally. About a week later, I had a meeting with the same group of engineers, the ones who'd piled onto that call and tried to bulldoze me in the first place. I explained the total failure and gave them the damage estimate. And the corporate engineer, with all the confidence of a man who had learned nothing, said something like, "Great work. We proved we can increase TAC if we want to." I just stared at him thinking, "Buddy, I'm a process engineer. The question was never whether TAC can be changed. The question is whether the process survives it." Then he asked me which of the remaining 3 TAC increase options I wanted to try next. So I told him, very calmly, that I didn't need to get into the details anymore. If he wanted the next trial, he should email my boss and ask him which one he wanted scheduled. The corporate guy actually loved that idea. My boss never brought up any follow-up trials, and that corporate engineer never scheduled another one of his requests through me again. About 2 months later, my boss quietly resigned. He disappeared from the company fast, like someone trying not to get noticed on the way out. I can't prove my little disaster run was the reason, but I know it didn't help him.
That's where the story ends. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you think of this story in the comments. Subscribe to the channel and see you next time.